Hey everyone, Stephen Lowisz here with GTM Secrets. Everything go to market, sales, marketing, RevOps, analytics, you name it. We've had someone on talking about it. Today, I have James Chin from MaintainX on the line, who is an enterprise sales guru. James, I don't want to steal your thunder, though. Do you mind giving a little bit of context on yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me aboard, Stephen, and great to meet you. Great to chat with you. My name's James. Like you mentioned, I'm a director of enterprise sales at a late stage startup called MaintainX. We focus on enterprise asset management and a work order execution platform. So think companies that have large, expensive industrial pieces of equipment. That equipment is messy and difficult to service, goes down all the time. So we provide software that helps companies to manage and maintain that. I've spent over a decade in technology sales at this point, selling across a number of different companies, a number of different technologies and solutions, both as an individual seller and in leading sales teams. Primarily, majority of the time that I've been in sales has been in enterprise sales, like you mentioned.
How'd you get into enterprise sales? It's kind of where every salesperson wants to either go into management or enterprise sales. How'd you pull it off?
I think, well, how did I pull it off? A lot of hard work and just demonstrating that I could be successful at selling that type of motion. I think for me, enterprise sales, I use an analogy where I think enterprise sales is like playing chess, where the more that you play the game, the better you understand and can anticipate the moves that you need to make. But it's a really complex game in that you're always having to think several steps ahead. You're always having to think about the different players on the board. And for me, enterprise selling is some of the most interesting, most complex, most challenging type of sale. And that's exactly the type of problems that I wanted to go in and solve for.
It's also the most heartbreaking. You spend 6 months. I've spent as long as 2 years on a deal. That one came through. But when you spend that much time on a deal and it does fall through, sales can be the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
I agree 100% with that. Yes, I've used that exact phrase myself in the past.
Yeah, it can be a gut punch, but it's also awesome. When you say late stage startups, set a little context. How big is the company? How big's the enterprise team, et cetera?
The company I'm at now is over 500 employees. We have an enterprise team that's got 3 leaders and 2 different enterprise teams, about 17 sellers together. So I'd say we're a later stage startup, but we're earlier stage in terms of building our upmarket motion, developing enterprise sales. I've worked at other companies that were similar size in the past, to do similar challenges of moving upmarket. Then I've also worked at mature organizations where well-built, well-oiled sales motions, predictable playbooks, all of that.
Well, being the founder of a 4-person startup, I'm sales, marketing, CX, CS, you name it. So I can appreciate the more immature companies. I totally get that. Now, first of all, on the enterprise side, are you guys mostly inbound, outbound, both? What does that look like?
We are a mix of both inbound and outbound, but like with most sales organizations, outbound is critically important. We do have every sales organization I've worked with has had top-notch sales development that helps us with top of funnel, but it's really on us as sellers, AEs, to be owning our pipeline, owning our top of funnel coverage. And if that means that we have to go in and do a lot of self-generation on our own, that's part of the job.
So how do you do first of all, if I have to imagine your current persona, I know you've sold into many, but the current persona would be IT leadership. Am I right?
At some companies that I've been a part of, yes, that's been a persona, key persona.
Okay. So let's take IT as an example. Everyone and their mother wants to sell them, right? They are getting bombarded with emails, and they are some of the most difficult people to sell to begin with. Yeah. So are there any specific demand gen tactics, outbound, whatever, that you have seen work well compared to others? And I'll preface that with, a lot of people are hating email right now. I used to be great at it. Fantastic. And now I kind of suck, even with great deliverability. Cold calls seem to be working actually better now than they did a few years ago. LinkedIn's always good, but it's not scalable. Like, what does your outbound or demand gen look like?
I think, across the companies I've worked at, to your point, we've tried many different things. Omni-channel outbound, we've tried LinkedIn social selling, cold calling, lots and lots of email. For me, though, I don't think it matters what you sell or who your persona is. One of the most impactful things that I've seen for pipe gen is going out and getting to where your customers are and engaging with your community. Those are two of the most impactful things that I've seen for pipe gen. It almost happens organically if you're doing both of those things well. So I'll give you an example of this. Years ago, I was at a company called Twilio, and at this company, Twilio, we sold primarily into a software engineer developer base. So there was we had an incredible marketing engine at that company, still does to this day.
Yeah.
And the marketing team did an amazing job of just creating community across the users of Twilio's platform and products. But on the sales side, this was in the earlier days where sales was still developing, go-to-market was still maturing at Twilio. We were not really taking advantage of that kind of community to kind of accelerate our pipe gen efforts, accelerate what we were doing in go-to-market. And so on the leadership front, we started to pull a lot of our AEs to get, hey, what are some creative ideas? How can we go out and do things differently, get you off the phones and get you out of outreach for doing email sequences? And we had one seller that said, hey, let's go to a brewery. And so we looked at a bunch of different cities, and we found a place that had a good concentration of customers, prospects. We got a little bit of budget for some food and drinks, and then we just took over the back of a brewery. We at this particular event, we did have a customer come out, gave a little talk about how they were using Twilio and the platform, but there was something about just going in and engaging in person with the community. I can tell you that this customer that was even our speaker that was coming to this event, he was so excited about the opportunity to talk about what he was doing, what he was building on the platform, that he actually came with his own swag. He had a 3D printer. He printed these little buttons that had our company logo on them. He was literally handing them out to attendees of the event. So it was just incredible even seeing that happen. But at this very first get together, it was a few dozen people, a handful of sellers, and just a lot of great in-person interaction. And it wasn't just us interacting with our customers, but it was our customers and users talking to each other, talking to prospects talking, getting to learn about how our customers were actually, what they were doing, what they were building, the success that they were having. And so that very first brewery event influenced a number of key deals that we had across our enterprise team. And so then we decided, hey, we're onto something here. Let's do more of this. So we looked at other cities. We experimented with different formats. Sometimes we had a customer. Sometimes we had a presentation. Sometimes it was just purely a social event. No agenda. Like, let's just get out there and get people together, have a good time, interact, socialize with each other. And over time, what started as this grassroots effort, it became so successful and was starting to impact such a significant amount of our pipeline that actually marketing came in and took it over because they wanted to formalize it, ended up turning it into this really formal program that got branded as Twilio Talks and popped around to many different cities throughout the course of the year. There was a lot more budget that got added to this. So we got nicer venues, better food, more swag, all of that fun stuff. But again, the premise here was really simple. It was just actually physically getting out there in the real world, creating a way for sellers to engage with the community. And then again, for the community to engage with each other, because if you create enough of those in-person opportunities, your community will sell for you.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Now, I understand using events for account expansion. Oracle just did that trick to me. They took me to a Red Wings suite, and it was awesome, right? It makes you feel all soft and fuzzy, even though, it's a $1 billion company that spent a couple grand. That being said, how'd you get prospects there? Hey, do you want to go drink on our dime? I mean, it has to be a little bit more compelling than that if you're doing cold outreach. If you've already talked to them, I could see that, but walk me through the approach to actually get prospects there.
Certainly at some of these, we hooked prospects with a great speaker from a recognizable company that might be of interest to them. We talked about people that would be coming. So generally, executives like to engage with other executives, or developers love to engage with other developers from like companies that they recognize as peer technology companies, for example. So there was a lot of referencing of who's going to be there, what's the value you're going to get out of it. There were certain events that we did more specific thought leadership topics. So now you can come and actually learn something. And that something was not always specific to the product that we were selling. Sometimes it was much higher level and more generic. So it depended, but usually we tried to bring some type of value add, whether it's you're going to get the chance to meet somebody that you're going to enjoy, or you're going to get the chance to learn something by you spending your time with us. Then, of course, there's always a subset of folks who, hey, you offer a great conversation, some food, a beer, and they're going to be happy to come out and to just hang out with you.
Yep. No, that makes perfect sense. You're giving me some ideas actually for, identity matrix. Give me an example of a go-to-market motion that completely and utterly failed. Let's have a little fun with this for a second.
I think that go-to-market success is really heavily dependent on people, and the people that you have, the type of sellers. They're just a really, really key factor to whether or not your motion is going to succeed or fail. And so a number of years ago, I was at a startup where we were trying to build, again, an upmarket motion, and that's something the company hadn't done before. At this company, there was a team that got hired in advance, and then I came in to help take over the team. And there was some really good talent on that team. I think very experienced, very expensive sellers who had come from very large, recognizable companies, knew how to sell to the C-level, had great track records of success. They sold multi-million-dollar deals, like all the sellers that on paper look like your perfect profile. And as you might expect, things didn't go well. We had a lot of trash on the team, both in terms of people leaving, people having to be let go. And for me, there were really like two learnings in all of this from some of the failure that we experienced there. One was that from a people perspective, sellers need to match the motion. And so almost immediately out of the gate, I realized that we had a couple of major issues. The first was that the type of technology that we were selling at the time was actually purchased in a somewhat of a decentralized way. So the motion was actually go in and do small lands and then expand across many different groups or divisions to grow accounts more slowly over time. And we also had a really limited inbound funnel at this company, and so we needed to do a lot of self-sourcing at the top of the funnel. And there was a pretty significant mismatch between the seller profiles that we had hired and just the work that actually needed to be done. You had really senior sellers that were used to hunting large whales, very, very large opportunities. Those are the types of deals that they wanted to work, but there were no large deals here. You had to go out and work very, very small deals and run an expansion motion in order to slowly create those opportunities over time. And a lot of the sellers both were not good at doing this and didn't want to do this. So that was one challenge. Another challenge was that, the top of funnel that I mentioned, where the type of folks that we had hired were used to being strategic sellers, working large existing accounts, and they were very far removed from their top of funnel days or their sales development days. So outbound pipe gen, it just wasn't their core competency. It had, for some of them, been years since they had done it. They weren't necessarily good at it. They didn't want to do it. So the sellers didn't match the motion. Challenge number one. Challenge number two, and I'll say learning number two, was, on the people side, I think that sellers are most successful at certain types of companies, certain stage of companies, let's call it. And so just like you have sales leaders who might be good at building a startup from 0 to 10 million, let's say, or maybe someone who's better at a more mature company, 500 million to $1 billion. The same, I think, is true for individual sellers and AEs. Working at a startup, I'm sure you can appreciate this. It's like a roller coaster. Everything is new. There's a ton of ups and downs, all these chaotic twists and turns and just never ending change. And the reality of that is like, there's some people that thrive in that environment, but there's a lot of people that don't. And there's a lot of people that don't like that type of instability. So you either need to have experience, like worked in that environment before, experience success in that type of environment so you know what it's like, or you need to have some kind of ingrained builder DNA to actually want to work in those types of environments. And then you contrast that to working at more mature companies that have really well built playbooks. There's a certain level of rigor and expectation. There's a ton of process that you have to follow. And that's something that folks that gravitate towards earlier stage companies and like that may hate going to a larger company where you're going to have to adhere to a lot of standards, a lot of process, a lot of expectation. So, as a seller, I think you just need to know your whys and figure out what type of environment you're going to gravitate towards where you can be more successful. And that's, for me, the people side of the learnings coming from a semi-failed experiment of just snatch.
I think every startup, employee, founder, anything, there's a certain degree of sadism. It's a little sadistic. I say that very often. If you want to hear the worst campaign ever created, I owned a RevOps agency for years, and this is years ago, but I had a friend who worked for me, and, RevOps, think like sales and marketing automation tech, right? We had this wonderful idea of trying to expand in Michigan because all of our clients were remote internationally. And we decided it would be a great idea to send aspirin to people with a brochure that literally said, do you have a tech headache or some crap like that? Dumbest idea I've ever come up with. Did not work whatsoever. So I hear you. We all have them. So I'm a big proponent of, if you sound like another sales rep, you're doing it wrong. Pattern disruption is everything. Even when I talk to enterprise sales and marketing leaders, and we're talking some of the biggest Fortune 100 companies, I like being informal, and they are caught off guard when I don't do the complete dog and pony show and how can I kiss your ass today? And it works because that's just naturally my style, right? Or I found marketers who are totally into digital marketing and how can we automate the living hell out of everything. They respond really well to cold calls now. You will not get them via email, right? Not with all the MarTech platforms and agencies, et cetera, out there. So going old school is really critical. What's something maybe counterintuitive or tactic that you've seen work really well?
I think you kind of already said it. I was going to say something fairly similar. And maybe the way I could phrase it, like what's counterintuitive is sometimes the best way to engage or to progress is to not sell, or to avoid like what we think about from a traditional selling perspective. And so, like I mentioned, I sold for many, many years to technical personas, software engineers, developers, IT executives. And that's a persona that is obviously extremely technical, knows probably more about the technology solutions that you're selling than you do as a non-technical seller. But also, I'm going to overgeneralize here. This is a group that doesn't particularly enjoy being sold and marketed to. So, I once had an executive who said something that stuck with me throughout my entire career. And it was that she said that she didn't want enterprise sellers in her organization. She wanted consultants. And that's something that, I've tried to internalize and apply at every single company that I've been at ever since. There's a lot of talented people in sales, the 20 plus year veterans that have sold at Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, Amazon, you name it. And these folks know every enterprise sales trick in the book, every sales methodology that has ever been written. The reality is sometimes it's not about technique. And I think especially today, buyers are, number one, they've never had as much accessible information out there. And that has forced us to change how we sell. Number two, they're exhausted from these techniques being used nonstop for decades now at this point. And so I think like the most successful way to sell is, again, not to focus on selling, but about delivering real value to your customers. It's actually spending the time to understand their current state and their current challenges, and then educate them on how technology can solve for those problems, just exactly as a consultant would. And so, what I found over the years is that those that actually take a consultative approach to their selling, and you're focusing a lot more on education, enablement, discovery, to the point where you actually understand current state and can be prescriptive about creating a roadmap or a plan for someone and how they're going to achieve future state. All of that is far more efficient and successful than, again, whatever you'd consider traditional enterprise selling tactics to be, both in terms of building trust with especially more difficult personas, but also in actually getting there and closing.
So I have two questions. The first one is, you got spin selling, challenger, consultative, you name it. There's a billion of them. Do you like any of them? Is there one that you gravitate towards?
I'm a huge fan of challenger selling. So I think like in some ways the challenger sale kind of emulates portions of what I talked about, because it's all about going in and kind of teaching and training someone to think about something differently.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you're selling to large enterprise, you're there talking to stakeholders that have a million different competing priorities and are getting bombarded with many different technologies that everyone is saying can come in and help them or change them. And so the larger the company you sell to, the more analysis paralysis there is, just in terms of actually moving away from status quo. And the number of people that need to be involved in driving consensus to make a technology change is harder and harder the bigger the company gets. So being able to go in there and come in with a very prescriptive point of view, but actually to teach somebody and help to try and change their point of view or their understanding of what they think is working with status quo. What are they not thinking about? What are their peers doing that they could also be leveraging that could make them more successful in whatever, those high level company initiatives are? Those are all things that you've got to go in and take more of a, not only have a good point of view about, but also you need to be able to effectively teach people about certain technologies or certain ways of thinking that they're not thinking about. And that's challenging status quo, and that can be very effective, but also very difficult to do that well.
So I agree with everything that you just said, and I have an affinity, if I'm going to label it, more towards challenger than I do like spin and whatever, right? I'm kind of a smart ass, so I like going toe to toe with people and saying, well, here's why you're wrong. Yeah. That being said, you end up kind of in two buckets to reach out to somebody and earn the right to be consultative, because you can't reach out to somebody and say, hey, can you tell me about your MarTech infrastructure? They're like, no, get lost, right? Can you tell me about your VoIP systems, like over at Twilio or, whatever, CDP, whatever you want to talk about, right? You have to earn the right to do that. It's like when you get on a call, let's say you're cold calling, I am a big proponent of yes, no questions for the first couple of questions so that you earn the right to ask an open-ended question. How do you do that? How do you blend like, no, I'm not just trying to shove this down your throat, but here's an actual hook to make it worth your time to talk to me? How do you blend that when you're sending an email or a LinkedIn message, whatever?
It's a good question, and it's a really difficult question, is what is that hook? And I think, I've been through so many outbound trainings, different outbound methodologies and styles over the past. Like, personally, for me, I'm not always the biggest fan of trying to lead by finding like, hey, do we have a shared college, or is there a shared sports
No
team?
one cares.
Yeah, build rapport with you in this outreach. I think what is more successful when it comes to a hook is you got to understand the person that you're trying to engage with and what matters to that person. What are they talking about? What is their role and their responsibility? What are some of the challenges that they have? And so that's part of it, is what is your understanding of what matters to them? And then the next part of it is, what is something compelling that you can say that can help them to buy into this, to a a fact that you can actually help them solve that problem. And in some cases, maybe it's a referenceable customer story with a brand that they know about. In some cases, maybe it's an ROI or a statistic that might be meaningful to them. In some cases, maybe it's educating them on a certain type of technology that you think likely fits into the need that they have. Whatever it is, I think that hook is really important, but you're not going to be able to effectively figure out what that hook is if you don't understand the person that you're trying to reach.
I gotcha. So as opposed to saying, hey, do you want to buy my shit? It's more like, here's valuable resources. Let me know what you think, that sort of a deal. Really using content, let's call it content syndication. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, I think I think so. Whether it's content or whether it's just, demonstrating that you have an understanding of the things that are important to them goes a long way.
Love it. This is awesome. James, everyone says LinkedIn, but where's the best place for people to connect with you?
It is actually LinkedIn for me. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. And yeah, would love to connect with anyone who wants to chat.
I had one person say Instagram and one person say their cell phone, and I stopped him from giving his cell phone number out so he wasn't blasted. But yeah, LinkedIn's the go-to. James, really appreciate you coming on, taking time out of your day. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.